Society bombards us all the time with the importance of self-care, but what actually is it? And when is self-care not really self-care? When does it become laziness or selfishness? And while we're on the topic of selfishness, in this video, I'll also explore the difference between selfishness and narcissism. So as usual, the structure of this video will explore firstly the concept of self-care from a psychological perspective, and then secondly, a spiritual perspective. So why is self-care so important? Well, there's a reason why there's cliches out there in society, cliches around filling up your cup and how we can't actually give fully of ourselves unless we are filled up first. It's a cliche for a reason, that if we are attempting to offer services, love, generosity, compassion to others, but we have not got the adequate energy or resources within us to offer that to others, then our offering is going to be fairly short-lived and we're going to burn out very quickly. So the importance of self-care really is not just a luxury, which some people might think of it as being, it's a necessity. So why is it so hard for some of us to engage in self-care? And the short answer is our program beliefs. These unconscious patterns that are running underneath the surface for all of us, because we need these beliefs to help us navigate the world, to help us automatically respond to various situations that we come up against and not have to consciously think about each and every response. And so the sorts of beliefs that get in the way of self-care are beliefs around others before myself. If I put myself first, I'm selfish. Maybe people will leave me if I'm too selfish or self-focused. And there are also, some broader societal beliefs that you could bring into play when looking at what undermines the process of self-care. If you look at beliefs like, I must achieve to be successful, something that's a very widespread mentality in society. Well, if I'm stopping and doing self-care, then I'm not on my path to achievement, am I? Or I need to do things, otherwise I won't get ahead. Again, same concept. If I'm not doing, then I'm lazy. This distorted idea that we always have to be doing. And one that I think is a bit of a prevalent one in a country like the one I live in Australia is, if I love myself, then I'm up myself. So this whole idea that self-care or self-love is somehow arrogance or ego or an extreme that is not desirable, to care for oneself or look after oneself. So there are these broader beliefs out there in society that really act to work against making self-care a priority. And when you explore on a much deeper level the psychology of why we have trouble violating these beliefs, is because these unconscious beliefs are laid down very early in life. In the first 7 years of life, for example, a lot of our unconscious core beliefs that run our individual personalities laid down. And from a very primitive or primal perspective, if we violate these unconscious beliefs that we believe are keeping us safe, then at a deep unconscious level, we believe some disastrous event will occur, like death, for example. Now that might sound a bit of an exaggeration, but look at it this way. If we were running a belief, or one of our ancestors was running the belief that we had to put everyone else before ourselves, and if we don't put everyone else before ourselves, then we won't be loved. If we're not loved, then we'll be cast out by the tribe. If we're cast out by the tribe, we're on our own, we can't look after ourselves, and we will die. Now that's a very deeply unconscious pattern that would run in modern human beings, because of course we won't die if we're cast out, that services in the Western world will come and look after us. But on some level, we really feel that it's an imminent threat to our safety if we violate these beliefs, and why we experience so much pushback when we try to change a pattern and not go along with these automatic belief patterns and behaviors that go with these beliefs that we encoded early in life. Let's look at what self-care is not. So, for starters, binge watching TV. That might be disguised as a bit of self-care time when really it's just emotional numbing and avoiding our responsibilities. Or retail therapy. Again, disguised as self-care when maybe it's actually just avoiding emotional discomfort and seeking this external validation through material goods. It's also not saying no to everything under the disguise of putting up boundaries, when in reality, saying no to everything is just isolating, avoiding accountability, reinforcing beliefs like I'm better off alone. Eating comfort food, that's not self-care. Emotional eating is called that for a reason. It's not meeting a nutritional need. It's a temporary self-soothing. Excessive time alone that we call me time. And I emphasize excessive because when we overuse a strategy like that, it's simply avoiding intimacy or social connection or vulnerability, or reinforcing maybe a belief that other people can't be trusted and I have to stay away from them. Then there's, say, skipping workouts because I'm listening to my body. Again, if that's really not what you're doing, that it's an excuse disguised as self-care, when in fact it's just avoiding the hard stuff, doing what really your body needs to be healthy. And this one's one of my favorites, in fact, overindulging in spiritual and wellness practices. So that can include meditating, journaling, and reading spiritual books under the guise of self-care, when really it's just a spiritual bypass. It's a way to just avoid things by indulging in reading and writing, but not really doing the deeper inner work. And we'll come back to the spiritual side of self-care a bit later in this video. Oversleeping and calling it rest, that's not self-care. Taking too many social media breaks and engaging in mindless scrolling, that's not self-care. Spending money on luxury wellness services, which is really just maybe sometimes about seeking a quick fix rather than through pampering, rather than really doing something meaningful for yourself. So all of those examples, when used inappropriately, are not self-care. Of course, used appropriately, watching some TV, a trip to the shops because you deserve it and you've been really working hard, setting healthy boundaries, having something nourishing and enjoyable as food at times, taking a bit of time for solitude. So these are all of the healthy examples that are of course valid examples of self-care. But we just have to be careful of the intensity and the duration and really the intention behind why we're engaging in a practice. And only we individually know what the intention behind a given choice is. And one guide that I like to use with my clients and I guess personally is whether a behavior is motivated by what we call aversive control versus appetitive control. So let me break those two concepts down. Behavior under aversive control is doing something because we're getting away from something we don't like. Behavior under appetitive control, coming from the word appetite, is moving towards something we want. So those unhealthy examples that I listed a moment ago are really all examples of behavior under aversive control, getting away from something that we don't like, that we don't prefer as our main motivation for engaging in a behavior. And in the long term, that's never really going to work for us to have that as our motivating drive for our behavior. I should point out that it's fairly unavoidable to have our behavior completely driven by appetitive control or being driven by what we want, because there are invariably going to be motivations that are driven by getting away from something that we don't like. But if we can be conscious that most of our choices are driven by doing it because it's taking us in the direction of our values, who we really wish to be as an individual, not running away from something that feels hard or uncomfortable, and we can really be honest with ourselves on that point, then we can be a bit more confident that our choices are coming from the right place. I also wanted to touch on some concerns that I've noticed with a few clients that I've worked with, where self-care has been branded as selfishness. And I think that's more common with people, for example, who have traditionally been givers and really focused a lot of their attention on giving to others, and then decided to make a bit of a change and realize that they need to give to themselves more, and been accused of being selfish because they've done that. Now, of course, there are some people that go from being very selfless and switch too far to the other end of the scale and go into selfishness and a disregard for others, which of course is not healthy. Most of the time that's temporary and the middle ground can be found again, but in some cases, I guess we can go too far the other direction. But it also got me thinking about this concept of narcissism that's really rife in certainly people that I come in contact with in my work and just in conversations in society. Certainly at this point in time, as I'm recording this video, this idea of narcissists and narcissism being a very prevalent set of characteristics in human beings in society at the moment. And I really think it's been blown out of proportion, and people either being maybe a bit selfish at times or self-focused at times is being branded as narcissism, when really it isn't. Because when you look at what narcissism is, it's this grandiose sense of self-importance or status, seeking admiration all the time, exploiting others, a sense of entitlement or seeking special treatment and arrogance. It's really quite pervasive. When we're talking about narcissistic personality disorder, it's all of those characteristics or a bunch of those characteristics at a level where it really severely impacts all relationships. There's one in the list of narcissistic traits that is hard to quite hard to differentiate where it's coming from or what level of impairment maybe it's causing the person, which is a lack of empathy. So I think that is the one that people are jumping on and going, well, this person's not showing empathy, they're focusing on themselves a lot, and therefore they're a narcissist. There's got to be a lot more going on than a lack of empathy to be labelled a narcissist. And I think people, again, having significant others in their life, maybe change or realising that they do have a bit of a self-focused flavour to them, is being mislabelled. Narcissism is not putting in healthy boundaries. Narcissism is not focusing on oneself over others appropriately, or even moments of selfishness. That's not narcissism. Struggling to see another person's perspective, which links to what I just said about empathy, that is not necessarily narcissism. Trying to remain in control of a situation because maybe you're a bit of a control freak, as people like to use that term, is not necessarily narcissism. Being rigid and mentally inflexible is not narcissism. Some of those examples there that I just listed off around mental inflexibility and wanting to be in control, when they're a bit extreme, they are signs of maybe beliefs, unconscious beliefs at play that have caused a level of, impairment or disruption to an individual's life so that their relationships aren't flowing well, but it is not cause to come out with this label of narcissism, which, as I said, I think has been thrown around very loosely these days. And I also get disturbed when I hear words like narcissism being thrown at people who are just putting in these healthy boundaries and being used to basically gaslight them into thinking that they're the ones at fault just because they put in a healthy boundary and engage in healthy self-care. So that's all I wanted to say on narcissism. It's just a little side note, but a relevant one to what's going on in society, I believe, at this point in time. So if you feel like you are struggling to put in healthy self-care behaviours like being able to say no, taking time out for yourself, dedicating time to exercise or meditate, then there could be some unconscious patterning or parts of the personality that are out of balance and making it difficult for you to put those healthy self-care behaviours into action. And if you're one of those individuals that struggles with self-care and can't quite figure out why, I do have a free tool on my website. It uses the Enneagram as a resource to help narrow down what could be going on as far as parts of the personality or beliefs that could be driving your difficulties with self-care. So feel free to check that out on my website with the link below. So now to a more spiritual or metaphysical exploration of this concept of self-care. For starters, a lot of people that I've encountered that consider themselves to be on a spiritual path or have at times struggled with this balance of giving to others much more than giving to oneself. And it is seen as a very noble and altruistic thing to do, to give to others and be selfless. But there can be a sense that can go too far, and that self-sacrificing can be overdone, and even some people feeling that earning money for serving others is not seen as a spiritual way to operate in the world, because it's attached to this idea of materialism and materialism being evil, which it's not. We are physical beings as well as spiritual beings. We are both. And if we deny the physical humanness of who we are by constantly just giving and giving and giving and not acknowledging that we as individuals deserve to be receiving as well, then we're not honouring both sides of our humanness, the spiritual and the physical. And I've touched on this pattern of giving more than receiving in one of my earlier videos, Stop Owning Others' Stuff. And in this video, I explore a bit of how taking too much responsibility for other people's stuff, their emotions, their experiences, can be problematic. And in this video, I explore the issue of over-empathy. And I think it's appropriate to touch on it again here, because this feeling others' suffering, others' pain too much compels us to keep wanting to care for them more than ourselves. In fact, it can also really be about trying to problem solve someone else's suffering so that we feel better, so that we get relief from how much we're feeling this other person's pain. But the problem with that is that in the long run, we end up burning ourselves out by constantly trying to give and problem solve and be there for someone else and not be there for ourselves. Another point that is relevant here is that we can only experience this life that we're in from the perspective of self, truly, that we are a soul that is embodied in physical form, and we are always going to be drawn back to experiencing it from this unique perspective. And when you really look at that, it's inescapable that whatever we do is going to have a self-serving element, and that's not selfishness. So an example is, if I am to do a good deed for someone else, I feel good about it, to see their smiling face or to experience them being uplifted. I benefit from that because I get to feel good. Now, is that me being selfish? Some people might be tempted to label it that way, but everything, therefore, has a selfish aspect to it. And it's not really selfishness. There's a self-focus, there's a perspective that only we as individuals are ever going to experience inside our individual bodies, interacting with others in the world. So if we just accept that whatever we're doing, it's going to have a self-serving element, even when it's giving to others, then maybe we can also shift into a perspective that it is safe just to give to ourselves directly rather than an indirect way of giving to others, then feeling good about it. And this brings me to looking at the concept of, or the fact in my mind anyway, that we are all connected in a unified field of consciousness. And so if we're all connected in this unified field, then if I do something to uplift myself or benefit myself, I'm actually benefiting the collective because I'm connected to everyone else and everything else. So in that sense, it's not really as selfish as what it might seem. I'm benefiting everything by giving to myself. And if you look at, for example, David Hawkins' Map of Consciousness, great book to read if you haven't looked at it. In his book, and using his methods of muscle testing to test out the truths of individuals operating at different vibrational frequency on his scale, an individual operating at the level of love consistently, which is a high level of consciousness, 500 on his scale, counterbalances the negativity of 750,000 individuals below the level of 200. It's because it's a logarithmic scale. That's why 500 has such a massive impact on the lower levels. So these lower levels are emotions or people operating at levels such as pride, anger, desire, fear, grief, apathy, guilt, and shame right at the bottom. So that's one person operating at that frequency of love consistently. There's not that many people on the planet that are operating at the level of love day in, day out, all the time. Compensating for 750,000 individuals. So, and that's just in embodying that frequency. That's not going out and interacting with those 750,000 individuals. It's just basically like what they're putting into the grid, what they're putting into this network, feeding this frequency of love in, benefiting people that don't even know they're being benefited. And that's a non-localized effect of benefiting the collective. And there's the localized effect, which is if people come in around that individual operating at that level, they may experience a shift up those levels of consciousness just from being near that individual. So not all the way to love necessarily, but moving from these lower levels of, say, guilt, shame, fear up towards levels like courage at 200 or neutrality at 250. So being completely self-focused and lifting our own frequency benefits others, even without doing anything. So for example, the individual who spends a lot of time meditating, let's say it is a Buddhist monk who gets to meditate every day and is operating with this high level of compassionate love frequency, is benefiting so many people on the planet without even interacting with any of them. Or let's take a more common everyday example. The person who maybe is doing a job, just working at, I don't know, the local corner store, doesn't seem to be engaging in a job that's particularly important and making a massive difference to humanity on outward appearance. But if they are, again, operating at a high level frequency, they're self-caring, they're self-loving, and operating at a high frequency, they are like a beacon for the whole community around them just by their presence. And these encounters they'll have with individuals each day, smiling, being pleasant, being genuine. So this is the power of giving to ourselves, of self-care. We can uplift ourselves. We are benefiting others either completely out of their conscious awareness or just through being a high vibrational frequency as we go about our everyday lives. And from a spiritual perspective, we can look at self-care as including the obvious ones: meditation, gratitude and appreciation, grounding, connection to nature, self-compassion experiences and exercises, doing the inner child and shadow work. The self-love work is self-care, breath work in all of its many forms. And I think perhaps most importantly, from a spiritual perspective, is listening to our intuition, because when we really tune in to what we're being guided to do by our higher self, we will know when we need to stop and self-care. When we truly listen to what the whispers of our higher self are bringing us, we will give to ourselves in appropriate quantities and not get out of balance by giving too much to others. So I really hope that you can take self-care, quite seriously and put it as a priority. It's not just an option. It's not a luxury. It's a must. And if you are struggling with that balance of giving to yourself versus giving to others, check out my website, and there are ways that I can offer you assistance in addressing your challenges using exercises that address things at a subconscious or superconscious level in my individual sessions or group expanded consciousness experiences. So I'd love to work with you if you need help with that. And I'll finish by saying, truly embodying love means not only giving love to others, but also giving to oneself. We're all equally deserving of love. And if you think about it, one of the most reliable sources of love is one that is always available. The source that comes from ourselves. Thanks for watching.